SkillStruct presents.
Okay, people, welcome to the SkillStruct Tech series, where today we have Agile Tech Consultant Chris Young from, well, you're a freelancer, right? You're not
That's
from a
right, yeah,
specific company,
freelance.
right? Cool,
Yeah.
perfect. So you're the right person to have this conversation due to your experience in all things Agile. So hopefully we have a great conversation on Agile. Chris, welcome to the SkillStruct platform.
Michael, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to have set this conversation up.
Okay, definitely. I'm looking forward to it. Before I deep dive though, I do see your background and I must ask, could you talk about your background a bit? What do we have? There's all sorts going on here. Vintage computers and all sorts.
There are quite a few. So that's an Archimedes. So that's, you know, the chip in your phone, the ARM chip in your phone. Mm-hmm. That's where it started, on the Acorn Archimedes computer. Okay. Next to that, we have a Commodore SX64, which was a luggable business version of the Commodore 64, the sort of 80s computer, which is where I learned to program. That's why I have it there. And there are various other things sort of getting kind of out of shot. There's an Apple II in the corner there. There's a TRS-80 down there and various things like that. And they're computers that I've kind of either programmed on, or they're kind of part of the sort of journey through computing that has got me to where I am now. You know, I started as a bedroom coder. I've kind of worked in sort of large organizations and small, have worked as a startup CTO, and I've now kind of settled into this role of kind of bringing the sort of the lessons from Lean and Agile to sort of infrastructure and operations. But so it's kind of, I'm a geek really, a sort of dyed in the wool geek. So I like all the kit. So yeah, that's why it's there. Awesome. They do all work, well, not all of them. And the plan is to have them all kind of linked up and do some nice sort of, ideally have something where you have a web interface, which then talks to Serial to then talk to the computer. So you could do some things where you could, I don't know, do some Alexa stuff that could then go over HTTP and then go over Serial and have the computers do stuff. And it'd be quite fun, you know, to say, hey, Archimedes, red screen or something, or play some music or whatever. And then, so that's the goal. But I mean, I've got, it's probably like 10 or so years of time to kind of get it done, but we'll see.
Awesome. Do you have any Raspberry Pis stuck at the back there somewhere?
Yeah, I have quite a few Raspberry Pis. This is not a Raspberry Pi, but it's kind of the closest I've got to hand, which is, this is a Pine 64. So yeah, so this has got an ARM chip in it. This was one of the first 64-bit single board computers. It wasn't as successful as the Pi, but that's really where you go from the Archimedes down to this. Yeah, my Pis are all in a box because I do a lot of stuff in schools, and I have them all in a box and I take them in and set them up. But the thing I'm going to use them for at home is looking at Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is one of these things that I've so far managed. Oh, I have got a Pi here. There you are. Here's a Pi with a massive, great fan on it, because my son and I are going to overclock this so it'll run the Java version of Minecraft quicker. But okay. I'd like to use the Pis as a way of exploring Kubernetes, because it seems like a fun way of doing it. So.
Oh, that's what's up. I mean, this conversation can be all about just what's behind you and in front of you, but I know that isn't what we came here to do, so I'll try and digress.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
No, awesome. Cool. Okay, so the theme today is Agile. I'm gonna talk about a few references, and I want you to guess where these references are from. So lead with vision and purpose, start small, enable autonomy, measure and test from the get-go, enable feedback, iterate and refactor, embrace acceptation. What am I talking about?
Well, those all sound kind of like lean principles to me, or I don't know, just some of them come from the Agile Manifesto. Some of it sounds like it might have come from Tahashi Ono, the Toyota Way. It all sounds kind of it sounds like the kind of stuff that I read, but I can't give you chapter and verse.
Not only read, but actually done a presentation on. Actually,
you're quoting me back at myself. Yes, oh, very good.
I am. I'm quoting
that's all good. That's good.
I'm quoting you from Agile Lessons, Birth of the Internet. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah. That's from the talk I did about the as you said, the birth of the internet, which is based on the book Where Wizards Stay Up Late, which is I read it, and then there was a bit in it that just stuck in my mind about how when the first 4 nodes of the internet were put together, it proved that it works. It proved that packet switching works, and you could send data around in this way that had never been done before. But then the first thing they did once they proved it worked was break it. They said, okay, now let's try and find the weaknesses and see whether this works beyond just being an academic exercise. And they built sort of measurement in place so that it had the means of being able to tell when things were working or not working. And in breaking it, they were then able to find all the things that were needed to fix in order to get it to scale to where we have today, where we have the global internet. And it's a great example of how when you're starting on something new, you're what Chris Matz calls optimizing for discovery. So you don't necessarily build stuff that will work at scale or will work in particular failure modes, but there's enough there for you to discover what the requirements are, what the operational tolerances need to be, and then you've got time to do it. And so as the ARPANET grew out from these first 4 nodes and became the internet, the entire implementation of it was completely rewritten. But the underlying principle worked, the packet switching principle worked. And I really like that story, and I really like a lot of sort of agile practices around kind of storytelling. We use this idea of user stories to represent requirements. I love the description of them as a reminder to have a conversation about something. It sort of shows that there's a kind of fluid and kind of almost sort of folkloric aspect to it. It's like we're a storytelling species, and I like this idea that by revisiting stories from the beginnings of computing, before kind of the Agile Manifesto was written, and that you can find things that are still true and still applicable, and kind of certainly appeal to me.
No, definitely, that's what's up. And I guess referencing the book and that presentation you did, is there a key takeaway, a key lesson, as it were, for people when it comes to Agile and ways of working?
Yes, I would say that it's you're always learning. As one of the engineers, I don't have his name front of mind, but I'll get it later. We can put it in the notes. Who said that he was driven to learn as much as he could, as fast as he could. And for me, that's the nature of technology work, the nature of computing is you're always working with things that are too big or too complex to know fully. They're ultimately unknowable. They're very often emergent or changing, or you only by doing them do you discover what's really needed, and then that leads to a kind of richer conversation with the people who are asking you to do the work, and you're working together to create this shared understanding. So yeah, it's kind of embracing learning as being absolutely the heart of what you do, and because of that, kind of not being too hard on yourself if you get things wrong and make mistakes, and kind of like or go down blind alleys. You see it all as like, this is a way of getting towards something better, and not being afraid to throw stuff away because it's like, well, we thought this was the best way of doing it, but then we found that was a better way. And it kind of all of that kind of making learning at the center of what you're doing, I think it makes for kind of more humane interactions, and it makes for more interesting work as well, because you're never kind of settled or sort of satisfied with what you've got. It's like, oh, surely this could be better, and then roll on from there, I guess.
Yeah, and that constant evolution, which is so integral with Agile, I'd say. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, definitely important. And I guess expanding on those points, really, I think we're going to get an overall sense of Agile and then maybe talk in specific. So my question to you is, what is Agile in simple terms?
That's a pretty good question. And there's a kind of textbook answer, and then there's the sort of experiential answer from my practice. The textbook answer is, it's a set of principles laid out by a group of sort of software consultants, engineers who met together and so people like Martin Fowler and Kent Beck, who met together and drew up a manifesto of sort of principles that they saw as being central to effective and successful software development. And then there's a whole load of stuff that's flowed on from that. The way I sort of present it, or the way it kind of, what it means to me is, you're trying to achieve agility, which is you're trying to be able to do things quickly, but not in a way that prevents you from achieving your goals. There's no good running fast if you just fall over or knock somebody over or have you. And part of that agility is also being able to be responsive to change and sort of be able to appreciate your environment, understand things, and move that. So it's about having a kind of an understanding of where you are and what you're trying to achieve, and bringing working methods to bear that help you achieve what you're trying to achieve in that context. So it's things like working in small iterations so that you get feedback very quickly. It's things like using tests to drive development, so writing the test before you write the code, which is test-driven development, which is another way of creating a feedback loop. You're saying, okay, our hypothesis is this code should do this thing. We're going to literally codify that hypothesis into a test suite. We're then going to run that test and it will fail because there's no code. And then we're going to write the code and we're going to refactor the code until we have a robust piece of code that can solve that problem. And then we're going to rinse and repeat, and we're going to go on and do it again and do it again. But the thing about that agility, and the reason why I said there's the kind of textbook answer and the experiential answer, is that with that agility, you're always stopping and changing things, and you're kind of revisiting things and revising them, and iterating. That means you've got to actually look at what agile and agility mean and say, well, are these actually still fit for purpose? Is the Agile Manifesto still a thing worth looking at, or does it need to be moved forward? One of the things that's very telling about the signatures of the Agile Manifesto is that they were all white men of a kind of my age, and I think one of the things that we're beginning to learn in technology is that we have a huge representation problem. We have a huge, that's a problem in so many ways, but the way I'd relate it back to kind of Agile, if Agile is about understanding where you are and understanding how you can learn more about your environment to get a better understanding of learning your goal. If your understanding of your environment and your understanding of the goal is all filtered through a set of kind of cognitive biases and a set of kind of cultural assumptions that are rooted in you coming from a very small monoculture, which is essentially my monoculture, white middle class men, then you're going to miss out a whole load. You're going to have a whole load of, as I say, cognitive bias, a whole load of blinkers on. That means you're just not seeing things that are part of the context or part of the problem you're trying to solve. So there's a great book by Caroline. I've got it right here, actually. Let me just grab it off the wall. Here we are. This is why I like physical books. So this is Caroline Criado Perez, Invisible Women. And this is about essentially how the world is designed for men and by men. It's like things like the size of things are based around the physical attributes of men's bodies. The data sets that are used for say machine learning will come from will be a male's data set, which won't have female representation, and so on and so forth. So where I'm going with this is that this is why the experiential versus the textbook is. We always need to be looking at, for me, for agile and agility to mean anything, you've always got to be looking at it saying, does it still work? Do we change it? How do we move it forward? Which is why I really like what you're doing with these SkillStruct sessions. Is you're asking questions of practitioners now, and you're asking for where they're at, to kind of to get, I don't know, create a conversation, create a dialogue around this stuff, and see what works, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, I mean, ironically, maybe we can use the manifesto almost against itself in a way, or use it to actually reinvent the Agile Manifesto.
Exactly. Yeah. It's almost like saying this is the test suite. Now, do these tests all? Are these tests all still fit for purpose, or do we need to change them? I like that. Yeah.
Awesome. And I guess circling to Agile and now building on that definition, actually, what I want to do is talk about Agile in a sense, not at first the traditional working in an organization, but in your everyday life. Do you actually apply Agile practices, and if so, how?
I think I'm just going to pick on one specific thing instead. So the principle that I probably use the most is the principle of real options. I'm going to grab this one off the shelf as well. So this is Chris Matz, Oliver Madsen, and Chris Gary, real options, and this is an idea, a kind of a thinking tool that's come out of the Agile community. Chris Matz was part of the kind of sort of late 90s, 2000s sort of ThoughtWorks and cohort in London. And he came up with this idea of real options, and it's a very simple idea. It's the idea that in anything you do, there's a point where you actually have to commit to something, but until that point you have options, and those options all have value and can all be explored until they expire. And there may be some reason that there'll be something that drives the point where they expire, and the value of those options will be kind of predicated on sort of when they expire. So a trivial example is like deciding how to get into London. So I've got I live in southeast London, I want to get into town. My options are the train, the bus, or my bike. And if I've got enough time, and I know like how long the bus takes to get in, and maybe I want to read on the bus, or and I know how long the train will take in, and I know how long my bike will take to get in. Of those, the bus is the longest, the train is the middle one, the bike I can absolutely guarantee, because barring kind of sort of calamities, I won't be subject to signal failures or delays or what have you. So when I've got like an hour before I need to be in town, I've got three options. As the time ticks down and my meeting isn't moving and I'm prevaricating and kind of doing stuff, I'm like, okay, how long am I going to leave these options open? I've just lost the bus option because it's now like 40 minutes to go. I've now got train and bike are the two options left. What's more important to me, doing the stuff I'm doing here or getting into town so I'm ready for my meeting? Maybe I've got like two trains I could take. It's like, okay, I've just lost the Queens Road Peckham option because that's now gone. I'm now down to the Brockley train on my bike. And it's just as you get, and then maybe I then say, right, I'm going to get on my bike. So I got on my bike, the train option has now completely disappeared because I'm physically on my bike. I can't go anywhere else. And I think it's that thing of thinking of things as options, and thinking about when is the moment that I commit, and how do I decide when to commit. That's probably the thing that I use the most in my life. And what I like about it, and why I think it's a very kind of an agile principle, is it moves you away from thinking about solutions to thinking about problems. So rather than thinking I'm going to take the train into town, which is you've immediately conflated the solution with the problem. The problem is I want to be in town. The solution is the train. And if you step back and think, well, actually, no, I have the option of taking the train into town. What other options do I have? Then you start thinking about things in you start thinking about requirements, and you start thinking about things multidimensionally. You think, okay, so the train, it has this cost, it has this benefit, but what of the other options, what costs and benefits do they have? It's like, well, the bike has the added healthy advantage, or the bus, I can read more on the bus than on the train, or various things. And I just find it a really it's like the Daniel C. Dennett thing of the importance of thinking tools. And he says you wouldn't do woodwork barehanded. You use tools to do woodwork. So why do we do thinking kind of without tools? Why do we do thinking kind of bare-minded, as it were? And I really like it when you can reach into the Agile toolkit and grab a tool and use it. And as I say, so I think, as I say, real options. And if you haven't read it, Commitment. by Matt Scarry and Mason is a really first-class read.
No, that's what's up. It's almost like, actually, when you were talking about the analogy, when you just solve something straight away, it's like a waterfall mindset. Like you have something, one thing, you're focused on that, you're not thinking about other factors, and then you might get to the train station and not realize that, you know, trains aren't working that day. And
exactly. Yeah. You've kind of done your analysis up front. Have you said, okay, we've planned everything, the train's the way to go. And then, as you say, you get to the station, oh, trains aren't running. Oh, we didn't know that. Okay. Well, exactly. That's a brilliant, I love it. What a great comeback.
So the agile way is, like you say, building your options out, finding out what's the best option, and then moving accordingly, which actually makes a lot of sense, actually. And you're right. I don't think a lot of people take the time to actually focus on the options. They focus on how to solve something rather than the options itself.
Yeah, and I think also to come back to the kind of to the representation and sort of gender bias thing, is that if you are jumping straight to your solution, then, and you're not thinking about options, then you're also going straight in with your biases. So I like trains, so I would probably choose the train, but there may be a whole load of good reasons for not doing that. But I'm trivializing that. I don't mean to. But if you go straight to your option of a solution, you can then step back and say, well, why don't we ask somebody else? And why don't we see if we're thinking about this this problem or opportunity that we're doing the work for in a way that might expose something else. I like trying to kind of make things measurable and kind of come up with a way of saying, have we made any kind of difference? Even just as a way of you know, sometimes it's harder than others, but and not everything kind of collapses down into a numeric thing. But if you draw like a radar diagram and say, okay, so we're trying to do this piece of work. Why are we trying to do it? Well, we want to get more money into the company. Okay, right. So that's great. You want to bring more money into the company. Anything else? No. Just want to bring more money into the company. All right. What if by bringing more money into the company, you brought more money in, but you actually alienated a load of your existing customers, and then in the long term you lost them? Okay, we don't want to do that. Right. Okay. So that's another. Okay. So how are you making sure you're thinking about those customers? Okay. And what about if by bringing this money in, let's say you've thought about the customer's well-being and they're all on side, you're bringing this money in, but now you've discovered that you're in your supply chain, you've got a massive carbon footprint. Don't do anything like that. Well, you know, that's not good. Let's look at that. So what I'm trying to say is you can gradually build up this kind of like sort of radar diagram of here are things that we care about in order for things to be a success. And some of that you're not going to get that if it's all coming out of your head, if you're just like thinking purely in terms of like, if you're jumping straight into the solution space. And it's this idea of being able to step back from solutions to think about problems, think about requirements, think about needs, and say, okay, how do we move into this in a way where we're open to learning, again back to the learning point, and we're open to options, we're open to sort of moving and pivoting and finding our way through, and bringing people with us as we go. So that we are, the best sort of definition I've only had it told to me, so I don't know where it comes from. The best definition of leadership I've ever heard is having a kind of compelling enough story about why you should go somewhere for people to want to come with you. And it's that kind of like, it's that thing of making people want to be a part of it, rather than kind of sort of saying you're going here, you've got to go and do this. It's saying I've got this great idea, who wants to come with me? And it's far more compelling.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And just to highlight, this particular conversation is really based on the fact that before there was a point where people were thinking solution first, and you see long-term wise that doesn't really work out well for a company and organization, because there's some long-term effects. Maybe the technology that they used was suitable then, but they didn't forecast what it would be like in 10, 15 years. And now they've got a legacy system which isn't fit for purpose anymore. Whereas now companies are now realizing that constant iteration, that being adaptive, having options is very important. That agile mindset of thinking is why actually we have people like yourself in organizations talking to people and telling them how to essentially turn agile or refine themselves in working in an agile way or an agile mindset. And talking about companies and moving into that more, could you talk about the agile journey or typical agile journey when you go into a company, you see an organization, they're not so agile right now, or maybe some people are fragile. Why don't you talk about a typical agile journey when you go into companies?
That's a really good question, and I think I would say there's no typical journey.
I'm glad you said that.
Because I think it's all dependent on the context you find yourself in, and again, it's the kind of thing of the solution space and the problem space. I have come into companies or come into teams where I think I know it all, and I've had to be humble and learn that I don't. I've had to kind of I had a great boss. His name's Gulliver Smithers, and he was my boss at Base 79, which is a YouTube multi-channel network. It was one of the first ones around the same time as Machinima and Wrightster. He would say, Chris, sometimes you just sound like a hectoring textbook, and it was a real kind of, oh God, yeah. I think I'm trying to create change and bring new knowledge to bear in that, and it's just, no, you just sound like you're telling people what to do, and you sound like you're kind of saying it as if it's the on stone tablets. So I've had to learn quite a bit of sort of humility around that, and learn that I'm not a naturally empathetic person. I have to step back and think, well, hang on a minute, how much am I just bringing myself here? So I'd say anything where I think you're trying to affect change in an organization, the first thing is to understand why does the organization want to change, and then is that proclaimed reason for wanting to change, is that shared throughout the business, or is that something where there's just we just say the management team thinks we want to be agile, or we want to achieve these sales targets, or we want to do this deploy this new project, or we want to reduce our lead time to deployment. Is that actually something that the whole organization, or the people who are going to be affected by any change, is it shared with them? And unless you invest the time in understanding that, then you're kind of it's kind of castles built on sand, because you don't have a proper understanding of not only why the company wants to change, but also whether everyone in the company wants to be a part of that change or not. And sometimes when companies change or organizations change, there are people who won't be part of that change. I mean, I always use the example of my son's primary school, where we had a head teacher who has transformed the school. She's incredible, Rima Reed. She has done just absolutely wonders with her school. It's a deprived demographic in terms of the reach of the school. Means that the kids who have parents on food banks. The pandemic has had a material impact on people's well-being, and she has just supported families. She has made the school a nurturing, positive, and creative place. But in doing that, she didn't bring all of the staff with her. There were some staff who were like, "No, this isn't for me. I'm going." And she brought in. She had essentially a lieutenant, her kind of trusted partner in what she was doing, as another great teacher, Farhana Sultana, and it meant that there was their kind of ethos, their desire for change in the organisation and for the outcomes they wanted to achieve was something that could then be spread through the organization. You could say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is where we want to go with the school. We want to bring you with us, but we're not going to force you. So I think it's, so first is understand where the organization wants to go, understand the context, understand whether people are involved in it. And then sort of look at what the current setup is and get a good kind of situational awareness of that. And one of the things I love from Lean, from the kind of say sort of Takashi Ono, the Toyota management system, and then Pop and Deeks bring that into software, and you have people like Don Reinhardt and David Anderson. A lot of that is about mapping things out and saying, what does the territory look like? How do you get from a statement of need or opportunity or demand through to fulfillment of that, through to a positive outcome? And by doing that, and by mapping things out and understanding what the kind of organization looks like in terms of how does it work socially, as well as how does it work sort of in technology terms or in team structure. And people like Emily Webber are really good on this, all the stuff she's done around communities of practice. Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pierce, their team topology stuff. You're building up this sort of understanding of the space, and then you can start looking at actually making changes. John Seddon, with his sort of systems thinking stuff around organizational change, he has this mantra really called, which is purpose measures method. So you start with your purpose. Why are we doing this? Then you look at, like, how do you know whether you've actually made any change? How do you know whether you've affected change? And that's your measures. And then you get into, okay, what changes are we going to make? Whereas if you come in and say, right, we're going to do Scrum, everyone's going to be doing sprints of 2 weeks long, all the work's going to be tracked in this tracking tool. You're going to have retrospectives on a Friday, you're going to have planning sessions on a Monday. You're now a product owner, you're now this, you're the DevOps team. That's kind of bringing method and change in without having any of the situational awareness or any of the kind of building of shared understanding or any of the kind of creating of an understanding of the problem space. And it should be the last thing that happens. The last thing should be, we are going to adopt this agile method, or we are going to bring in this sort of lean thinking tool. That should come about because it presents itself as being the best option at the time for solving the problem. And it's also with the kind of mindset that it might not work. You might look at it in 3 months' time and say, well, we're not doing that again, and look at another thing or adjust things a bit. So it's kind of, again, it's a sort of humility and a kind of a willingness and a kind of, I guess it is humility really, to say this might not work, and I'm not going to be kind of sort of stubborn and kind of proud about something. If I might present something thinking, hey, I've got a great idea, we're going to do X, and then we do X and it's an absolute disaster. I've got to be willing to say, look, I'm sorry, that was I got that wrong.
Yeah, and not adopt a blame culture. And I think
precisely
there's an ethos of Kaizen, which actually definitely means that, and you're referencing about that Japanese philosophy before, and it's very important not to have that blame culture, so people are empowered to make changes. And like you say, sometimes 100%. Mistakes do happen, and so it's right for us to be in an environment, an agile environment, where we can experiment, do things that may not work, and see what happens, because that's when often the best innovations are made, when you're just doing things and experimenting.
Exactly. And I'm glad you bring up the blame thing, because I think one of the biggest problems with blame and with singling out individuals is that in doing that, it's a very easy thing to do, and it's a very it's a cruel thing to do. And I'd also say it's an ignorant thing to do, because if you say, right, you are responsible for this, you're not making any effort to think about the context. You're making a very crude kind of causal, because this happened. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Do we really know that? Have we, if we unpack this a bit, if we stretch our timelines back a bit further, can we look at some other things that might have had an impact here? And as you do that, you start to see that one person might make a bad decision. I have erased production data from live servers before. I remember the absolute dread of suddenly realizing, oh my God, what have I done? Fortunately, I was able to stop things and rebuild the disks, and it was a kind of like my heart started beating again moment. Now, you could, and arguably some people might say, well, you're the CTO, I think it was your responsibility. And you could also say, okay, why were there not safeguards in place to prevent this damn fool CTO doing this thing? Oh, well, because we put all this effort into this other stuff as well, or we weren't focused on that. So that's not me trying to get off the hook for my appalling faux pas, but it's the point I'm trying to make is that if somebody makes a mistake, then look at the kind of the contributing factors and say, well, that mistake is just one of many mistakes, and we can do something to to address that so that things in the future are better. When I do, like, again, I'm really, the space that I'm kind of happiest in is in sort of operations and infrastructure, and like sort of making sure things work. And if there's an outage on a platform, or there's like a data integrity issue or something like that, the way I do the kind of sort of incident review or retrospective around that is I take how much time we've got. So we've got an hour. I split that in half, and I say, okay, first half of the hour, all we're doing is writing down things we think have happened, not the reason why it happened, or not what we think someone was thinking, but we're just going to build a timeline of what things we think we observed happening. So it might be something like, well, the service went offline at 10 o'clock in the evening. Okay, right, and the service was brought back up at 2 o'clock the next day. Okay, right, well, we've got that. Let's move back from that. And you might then find that something like, okay, 6 o'clock in the evening before the 10 o'clock outage, a software update was made in a dependency here, or whatever it is. And you draw out that graph, and then the second half of the session is, okay, what do we want to change? So there's no like, okay, who's responsible? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? It's like, what do we want to change? So it might be, okay, we want a way of making sure that we know when dependencies in our software change, or we want a way of being able to respond more quickly to out of hours outages, or whatever it is. But it's about trying to think about things sort of in the round, try to think about kind of how we as people working in technology, it's a team sport. We work together, and we rely on our kind of mix of skills and kind of other people's strengths to make up for our weaknesses. How do we make sure that it's got that collegiate is the word that my good friend George Wright at BBC R&D uses. How do you create that collegiate atmosphere where there's a real sense of kind of learning again, but a sort of a shared sense of, we want to make this thing better.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm gonna switch back slightly to we were talking about metrics before you, or should I say, when you're focusing on how to measure these sort of things in organizations, how in order to be an effective team, essentially. And I think it's important for this conversation to highlight some of those metrics. So if you want to talk about how to make effective decisions using certain metrics to become even more agile in companies, what would you say is the answer there?
Yeah. So again, I'll kind of caveat this with it's going to very much depend on context and what you're trying to achieve. But the reason I like doing things with metrics, and I was about 4 years ago, I was flattered to be asked by Matthew Skelton to co-write a book with Mattia Battison about metrics and how teams can use metrics to help a software team help the business get better outcomes. The reason I like them is they're kind of...
It wouldn't be this book by any chance.
Oh, it would be that book. Yeah, well, look at you. Check it out.
There we go. Team Guide to Metrics for Business Decisions.
I love it. Thanks so much.
Cool. You were putting so many books before. I thought, let me pull your book.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's good. That's good. I like that. Yeah. So the reason I like working with metrics, in fact, I don't have a name top of mind, but we'll have to put this in the blurb. One of the data scientists at the Economist did a great subscriber event talking about their data science practice, and she said that the first thing that she does when she's looking at whether to use a graph or whether to talk about a particular statistic is, how does it help tell the story? And that's, again, it's this thing of storytelling and how storytellings help us build a shared understanding of what we're trying to do, where we want to go. And I think with metrics and data, they help take things out of away from it being one person's opinion, one person saying, well, I think we should do this, and here's why, and it's just a bunch of opinions. It's right, and instead it's like, well, here's some data that and this is how we've gathered this data, and by looking at this data, we infer this. Now, this data may well be incorrect. It may well have biases in it. It may be only telling you part of the story, but it's starting that story. It's starting that engagement. And I know I said before that kind of the sort of context is the I can't see my copy of the goal. I was hoping to grab my copy of the goal, but I can't see it from here. The context sort of determines where you start. But I'd say in software development and in trying to create a kind of an agile software development practice, the one metric that I go for first and foremost is throughput. And throughput, it's essentially the rate at which you get stuff done, and it doesn't need to be a kind of sort of millimeter accuracy thing. It could just be, we delivered 5 changes to the system this week, or we delivered 3 features this month, or whatever it is, or we fixed 7 bugs this week. But that, getting that metric, you don't need a lot of overhead to get it. You can do it just with a simple sort of Excel spreadsheet or cards on a wall, or just by talking to people. And once you have that in place, you can start having conversations with the people who are asking a team to do work, the people who are bringing demand or bringing opportunity. You can start having conversations about how long stuff will take to get done. And you can have a conversation that isn't based on sort of, it's based less on opinion, and by being based less on opinion, it can be less sort of, it's almost kind of the opposite of blame. It's like kind of, it's the same, well, it's sort of, I'd say it's a sort of peer of, it's a friend of blame, I guess. It's kind of like a thing of where it becomes about individuals saying, well, you're wrong to say it takes this long. I think you're deliberately telling me it's going to take longer, and I think it's going to take this long. It's like, well, we have some data here, and the data has shown that we typically get 3 things done a week. Sometimes it's 5 things, sometimes it's 1 thing, but it's 3 plus or minus 2. So based on that, if you're asking us to do 20 things, we're probably going to get, if we're going to do average of 3 a week, 20 divided by 3 is, I'm terrible at maths, by the way. So 20 divided by 3 is whatever that is. Let's say you get 5 things done a week, and it's 20 divided by 5, and it's 4 weeks. So, but sorry.
So yes, no, sorry, continue. I was going to help you out with the maths.
Oh, please do, yeah.
Yeah, so just a little over 6 under 7.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to get between 6 and 7 things done a week. We can get this done in between 6 and 7 weeks. Right. Then you can say, oh, it's going to take you between 6 and 7 weeks. Is it still worth us doing it? Maybe we prioritize this. Maybe we say these are the 2 most important things to do. Let's get those done first. Okay, cool. Well, there's a good chance those 2 things will be done in the first week, maybe the first 1 or 2 weeks. But you suddenly take a whole lot of pressure off, because you're not into these sort of discussions about, well, why do you think it's going to take longer than you think it is, or what have you? And that just becomes, it's almost like the sort of the keystone thing, the keystone metric that then allows you to start thinking about cycle time, about arrival rate, about to do things like the Little's law calculation for forecasting, to get into sort of probabilistic forecasting and stuff like that. But I also think that by looking at a bit like the way that the data scientist from the FT said, she looks for a number that will help tell the story. It's only part of the story. So more of that story will be told in narrative and in kind of a sort of qualitative understanding of what's going on. But also you can look at different sorts of metrics, and you can look at metrics around, you may have metrics that say, great, we're delivering loads of software, but then if you've got no metrics about whether anyone's using that software, it's like, well, why are you building all this software? Or if you've got no metrics about how well the team is feeling, if the team is not able to kind of, if there's no way of sort of being able to sample the team and say, okay, yes, we're doing all this software, but actually, oh my God, I've just looked and seen everyone's working loads of unpaid overtime, or loads of people are taking loads of days off sick, or when we ask people how safe they feel about asking questions in groups, they're all saying not at all. So it's kind of looking at, and again, it's a bit like the sort of requirements thing of sort of saying, let's treat this as being multidimensional. Let's try and build a kind of a sort of like a radar diagram or a kind of canvas of this and say, okay, yeah, we're really strong here, but we're weak here. What does that matter to us? What's important to us? How do we build up something equitable? How do we make sure that we're humane? We're kind of we're creating something that works for the whole group. So yeah, it's kind of it's in terms of, sort of using metrics as a way of helping with agility. I have a sort of grab bag of metrics that I'll go to, throughput being the first one. Because my engagement tends to be with technology teams, I start with the kind of things that it's in their gift to change. So in the stuff that they can actually have some kind of impact on, such as how much work they take on. So they might, if they're taking on loads and loads of work and they're all trying to do like 10 things at once, then you can have an experiment and say, well, what if we said never take on more than 5 things at once? Let's see how that affects how long it takes to deliver stuff and how your delivery rate. But also by doing that, you then set an example, and you can have a conversation with the business to say, well, here's how long it takes us to do stuff, but we've got some. But how about the stuff you're asking us to do? How do we know whether it's worth doing? And might that inform the way we prioritize stuff? Might we look at have we got any metrics around how this affects customer retention, or have we got any metrics around how this affects our CO2 footprint? Or have we got any metrics around the kind of gender or racial diversity of our workforce? Are we working in a way that is our recruitment policy driving us to always selecting our own image? Are we always going and firing, oh, I'll hire you because I like what you say and you sound like me. So there's all sorts of different dimensions to it, and I think it's that the thing for me, the metrics, the data, it's part of the storytelling, and it's part of making the storytelling something that is it's what Yuval Harari calls an intersubjective reality. So it's something that exists kind of outside of individuals, but it's created by all that subjective reading and understanding of things coming together. And then with that, you have discourse, and you have you have engagement, and you have people talking to each other.
Yeah, that really makes sense, actually. And when you are talking about these metrics in companies, is this when you talk about consulting in the agile space, are you doing this as like a scrum master, product owner, or are you there as a consultant? What does that look like?
It really varies. I mean, where I'm happiest now is I've come to the conclusion that I'm not particularly good at kind of sort of line management and kind of like running teams. I think there are people who are far better at that than me. Where I think I can add value is by almost being like the kind of naive outsider, coming in and asking questions of things, and sort of doing a bit of coaching, doing a bit of kind of like looking at the way work is currently done by a team, and sort of asking questions about where the pain points are and so forth. So some of the engagements I do are I work with sometimes I work as part of a group of people where I'll be focusing on metrics or on sort of operations and infrastructure stuff, and somebody else might be looking more at kind of sort of team well-being or the outcomes that are trying to be achieved. Sometimes it's I have a couple of companies that I do I have a sort of board level advisory role with. where I essentially have 4 hours a week with one company. That is, it's a bit of discussion with their CTO. It's a bit of maybe like identifying a topic where I can kind of help the team with, what have you. But I really like being on the tools. So I like to just kind of spend time working on writing Terraform, doing infrastructure as code. And by doing that, kind of like I get to see how the company's way of working, or the context in which that work is happening, how that affects the kind of efficacy of that work. So that that has then led into a broader engagement where I might start by just like bringing up some virtual servers, but then I'll end up sort of being more involved in, okay, how do we make sure our technology strategy is aligned with that of the business. But I'm a hands-on kind of guy. You can sell from this rubbish, but not rubbish. Well, this amazing archive of equipment behind me is I like to be hands-on, and so I tend to sort of move up and down the sort of the stack, as it were, depending on the client and the kind of engagement they want.
That makes sense. So you almost have this, I won't say necessarily unique, but it's definitely a good perspective, I would say, whilst you're developing or you're in the operational side, as you're saying, with infrastructure as code bit, you've also been in the slightly more looking at the client point of view, how to get the best value of something. So because of your experience playing both positions, it kind of gears you to understand the Agile methodology a lot better.
I hope so. And certainly it's kind of made me realize where my sort of limitations are, and to recognize quite how much work there is in being on the business side of things, and being the executive, being part of the C-suite, or being the VP of engineering. So I have a lot of time for people who have to juggle a lot of different concerns, or be as actively involved in recruitment. Being a good technology leader, a lot of that is about being in recruitment and making sure you have not only a fair recruitment policy, but you have one that is going to cast your net wide enough to bring in the people who are going to really make a difference, and making sure that the sort of personal development within an organization is really good. And so I've been a team lead in large organizations like the BBC. I've been a VP, CTO in a startup, from sort of employee number 2 through Series A to exit. And I just kind of I'm happy with where I am as a kind of I can bring sort of my sort of old timey wisdom, hopefully, to bear on some people's work.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And actually, it's actually an important point that we're actually talking about, because actually the traditional way of working, let's say from a developer point of view, may have been just focusing on code. But I think with the adoption of Agile, essentially we have to play a more broader position where we understand not only the technical aspects of things, but also the impact of that code. So we don't just focus on one thing. It's multi-dimensional in a sense that we focus on the bigger picture, really, which is the product itself.
Yeah, and I think the word that I pick out from what you just said there, which really stood out to me, is impact. That's a really good word to use there. It's like, what's the impact of what I'm doing? And if you can think of that in so many ways. You can think about it as just is it making customers happy? Is it beneficial to the business? Is it beneficial, is it humane? Is it something that we should be doing? And it's whatever you can. I really believe that you can have acts of leadership at any scale, and I think by looking beyond your own area of skills or expertise to other things, and trying to seek an understanding of that, even to say, well, I take my hat off to you who do this other thing all the time, because there's no way I could do it, but I recognize its importance, and I want to be a supporter of making, if that's part of the impact we're going to have, I want to be a supporter of that. I don't want to be, daggers drawn, or kind of. In the 1990s, when I was sort of doing my first load of development sort of after university, I think you'd always have kind of, the sort of arguments in the pub would be about, oh, sales have done this or marketing have done that, and now we've got to do that. And it's like, it's that kind of sort of what's the word? Sort of bellicose kind of like sort of fisticuffs warring sort of thing seems to have gone away. It seems to be far more about now, okay, right, so what is it you're trying to sell? What is the problem, the customer problem you're trying to solve? What can the technology do? And people working together like that. Chris Matts is one of the best people around that. Liz Keogh as well. And Gojko Adzik is probably my kind of hero in that area, in the work he's done around sort of impact mapping and sort of specification by example.
Okay. And actually, when you're referencing the marketing and the sales, I think, again, with Agile, we've got away from the silo way of thinking. Obviously, before Waterfall, everyone's in their sort of silos. And at the end of it, that's where we get the, what's marketing doing, what sales do, why has it turned out this way? But with the adventure of Agile, we're in an environment where we all have to play along with each other, because that's what the manifesto dictates.
Exactly. Well, we're far more collaborative, and so you've just actually reminded me of it was a very small piece of work, really. It was a tiny little iOS app that I did with a company a few years ago. But to put an app, anyone who's done this will know, and probably knows better than I do, to put an app into the App Store, it's not just a question of saying, oh, here's the code, off you go. You've got to have all the copy there. The copy's got to be like, it's got to fit in with the rest of your brand identity and what have you. You've got to have all the graphics ready. All this kind of stuff needs to be there when the code's there. So just by working with the head of marketing and her working with her copywriters and with the head of design and him with his sort of art director and visual people, everyone was kind of working together to say that when we were ready to go into the App Store submission, it wasn't like, oh, the code's ready now, hang on a minute, we haven't written the description that's going to go in the shop, or we're still waiting for a graphic to go here or whatever. Everyone was ready and the whole thing was there, and it meant that everyone was thinking about it as a whole, thinking about, well, how are we describing this app? It was a very small piece of a larger ecosystem, but it was just little things like, are we using consistent language here, language that's consistent with our desktop offering, and things like that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's and again, it's a collaborative thing, it's a learning thing, and it's use this word again, it's a humane thing. It's like, and it's kind of having, sort of putting your kind of pride to one side and saying like, okay, well, what don't I know? How can I kind of I may have immediately sprung to this, oh, well, here's the answer, we're going to do this. Hang on, there's probably some other options, and they're probably better informed by thinking about some other people's perspectives. So why don't we step back and see what we get?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And when you're working in different companies, do you operate with different Agile methodologies? So we've got like XP, we've got Scrum, or is it traditionally just Scrum that you typically do in companies, or have you done a bit of both?
That's really interesting. What I find is that Scrum seems to be the default sort of way of working, and I think that's because it's one of its great virtues is it's simple. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean it's got structure. It's got a regular cadence of when you do things, and you can describe it in more or less a sentence. Yes, you can go and do the Scrum Manager training, and you can do the product owner training, and you can there's a wealth of information around that. But you can distill it down to, well, we take some items from the backlog. We size that backlog based on how much work we think we can do in the sprint. The sprint is of a fixed length. At the end of the sprint, we have a demonstration of the work we've done. We have a retrospective, and we take the learnings from that into the next sprint. And it's a great that the simplicity and structure is a great virtue, because it makes it repeatable and makes it something that can kind of sort of propagate. It's also a kind of can be a sort of a problem, because it can appear to be like a silver bullet. and it can be a to be that's like, oh well, we just do Scrum and then off we go, and it's not thinking about context and not thinking about change. So I think I'd say that my approach is more about, let's say, first off trying to get some sort of understanding the context, understanding how things are currently done, and then I sort of propose change based on what evidence I can present for either the value of the change or the value of doing an experiment to test the hypothesis that change is worth doing. And it tends to be about, let's say, creating visibility, use it, and the metric, I say throughput is normally my back pocket thing. It's like, well, let's have a look at throughput. Oh, we don't know what it is yet. Great, right? That's the first thing we'll do. Let's make it so we can see, so we can make the work visible. We can see the rate at which work is delivered. We can see how much work is being done at once. We can see how much that work is about making new stuff of value and how much of it is about fixing things that are broken. And you gradually kind of extend out from that, and before you know it, you've brought in a whole load of different things, and people are suggesting their ideas, and you've got sort of continuous improvement, really, Kaizen, as you said. You've got that kind of desire of everyone on board to be always making things better.
Yeah, that makes sense. And moving the topic up, so I'm starting this new thing where I'm doing top 4 or Mount Rushmore.
Oh, nice.
Yes,
I like that.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
And so for you've got a choice of a computer scientist, a tech hero, or book. And I think you've gone for.
I've gone for computer science heroes, or kind of their people. So I'm going to start with Margaret Hamilton. Okay. So Margaret Hamilton, the Apollo, the moonshot code. Mm-hmm. The reason I've got Margaret Hamilton is because she coined the phrase software engineering. She was at a time where software was looked down upon. It was seen as sort of women's work because it was done by women, and it was like it's not the hardware, it's not the sort of macho hardware, but computers only as good as its software. And by sort of making software engineering giving it kind of the sort of kudos and respect it deserved, and writing all that incredible code that got spaceship on the moon, she's up there. So and then I've kind of got a sort of timeline going from Margaret Hamilton up to now. The next person I'm going to choose is Mary Poppendieck, and it's really because I saw her speak in, I think it was 2013 in Germany. She did a great talk called The Aware Organization, and I'm sure we can put a link to it in the video. Oh, yeah. And she'd done a lot of work in lean manufacturing, and then came into software and looked at software and saying, oh my God, what state is software in? Where's the visibility of the work? Where's the instrumentation? Where's the metrics? And she did this great talk called The Aware Organization, in which she had talked about the two bottlenecks in software. One is understanding what's the thing you should be building in the first place, and the second is getting it into production. And then from that, she then goes out and sort of talks in great detail about different sort of strategies and approaches to that. And the reason I've chosen her is because that video, that talk, is one that I watch again and again, and it's one that I showed to teams as well, because I just think it's one of great insight. And she's a real she's a great authority. She speaks with great authority, and she speaks stuff that is valuable. So she's number 2. Number 3 is Dr. Sally Ann Freudenberg, who I again got to know through her talk. So I met her when she was speaking at the Go-To Berlin conference, and she does a lot of great work around neurodiversity. But the talk the thing that made the biggest impact on me was her talking about creativity, and about how if you're hiring sort of in your own image, hiring to sort of based on your own kind of biases and your own kind of situation, you're actually harming your organization, because you're not bringing in people who could actually make that organization better. And she does a lot of talks about sort of a model of creativity that is about the incubation of ideas, but also the use of deadlines to kind of bring things to fruition. And then I'm going to finish with charity majors. So this, I've kind of gone sort of through time in terms of sort of, it's more like when have I known about these people, but also when have they been active. But also we kind of moved from sort of the tech of the space age through a sort of the sort of context of the organization and the sort of bottlenecks in delivery, and then into sort of human factors and neurodiversity. But charity majors, I really love what she's doing with honeycomb.io. I really love what she's doing around observability in software. I think the stuff that's being done that she's doing with that company around tracing and telemetry is just it's the next generation. It's what is going to make software really fly, because it's kind of the sort of, if we're talking about agility, we're talking about the ability to change software very quickly, to be able to change it without having to wait a long time to do it. It's about being able to change it on a Friday night and not worry about being able to do it, but also to get instant feedback, see what the state of something is, adjust accordingly. And I think the work she's doing as CTO at Honeycomb.io is exemplary of that. So I think that would make a good Mount Rushmore. If we have Margaret Hamilton, Mary Poppendieck, Dr. Talian Freudenberg, and charity majors, that would be a pretty. I could see that on a mountain. I think that would work.
Sounds very strong, and we'll definitely put that up on the screen for people to do their research as well, to find out why these people are so great. Thank you for taking part in that. I guess finally, if people wanted to reach out, or if there's anything you want to particularly plug, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you so much for, you already plugged the book, so I appreciate that. But no, it's great. No, it's good. No, I really, it's great. But no, thanks. Well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank Jon Topper from Scale Factory for connecting us. He's a great person in the community, and he's very good at kind of like, yeah, hang on a minute, you should speak to so-and-so. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Michael, and I thank you for taking the time to put all this together, and to set up such a great set of questions and to keep the dialogue going, and for having me on the channel. I love it.
Thank you. And yes, I can co-sign. Jon Topper is an A-grade individual, very great guy for the community. So yeah, thank you, Jon, for setting this up. And obviously, thank you, Chris, for taking the time on being on the platform. Going Sprint here, what, if anything, can you retrospectively say you want to speak about in terms of Agile before we close, if anything?
I'm just going to reiterate that it's all about learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And impact. It's all about impact as well. That's the one key thing that I took personally from this conversation. And people, if you want to continue to support the platform, don't forget to like, share, and all of that good stuff. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this tech series. Thank you again. Have a great day, and peace. This is a SkillStruct presentation. If you like what you hear and see, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.